for 15 years, delivering arts and education programs. He has toured with the Native American storytellers of New England. His singing and storytelling can be heard on Maine PBS, on tribal-sponsored awareness videos, on independent film, on HBO Lionsgate TV, and many other documentaries with topics on Maine's indigenous population. And he has served on numerous museums and educational boards. So we're going to go for about 30 or 40 minutes. So if you have any questions after that, please feel free to raise your hand at the bottom of the screen or post in the chat. So please join me in a warm virtual welcome for Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, Danagak, Willie Spuzzow, Kachimun Muswell, Notaliwis, Gijinawadu, Naga John Bear Mitchell, Notaliwis in English. Bernawapskig na Niljaya, the Dilna Bamuk, Muid, Naga Kagagus, Ijibalita Hadam, Ali Skijinawi, Ijibalita Hadam, Gizi Skijinwadwi. I'm speaking in my introduction in the Passamaquoddy dialect, which was a language I grew up with. I know I'm Penobscot, but we all speak the same language, all the tribes in Maine. So that's one quick, good lesson. And so if you're Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Micmac, or Penobscot, the dialect is the same, pretty much. We have different accents. But what I said was, my name in my language is Kachimu and Muswam. My name in English is John Bear Mitchell. Bear is literally my middle name. It's on my birth certificate. It's not in quotes. And my family comes from recognized two family clans, which basically is equivalent to our last names now. Our mother's side and our father's side, they're families. But mine is the Crow clan and the Bear clan. And growing up with my language, I was lucky to have it, but didn't know it was a privilege. And the place I grew up was called Indian Island, which we called Bernawupskig, which means where the rocks stick out of the water. So that's my introduction to myself. I mean, not to myself, I tend to talk to myself once in a while, but of myself, actually. And so what I'm going to do today is I have this PowerPoint up. I do want to let you know that I'm going to make this available to Roy, if anybody would like to request it from him, just for your consideration. Maybe you have some things you want to go back and look at. But I'm going to give you an overview of Maine Native Americans. And we have this word called the Wabanaki Confederation, these two things. And we'll discuss a little bit about what that means, because I think in order to understand that we are from what we call now Maine, we're an ancient society of people that have been here for thousands of years. And we recognize ourselves and the land a little bit differently, as identifying ourselves grounded to a state, rather we're grounded to the land. So I want to talk a little bit about that and give you the overview. And what does Wabanaki mean? You've probably heard the words Wabanaki or Abenaki, or the tribes I mentioned earlier. So let's see if I can advance this. All right, whoops, I'm sorry. It's early. Okay, so let's break it down. What does Wabanaki mean? Well, it's a sentence. And Waban literally is the time right before the sun enters the sky where we can see it. Literally, it's the light coming from above the ocean, below the ocean. So it's not quite up yet. And then what happens is it comes up and it makes itself visible, the sun. Then it's not Waban, it's a different time of day, but it's a pre-dawn sort of expression. Aki, anything ending in Aki, so if you're ever in New England, which you are probably, And you're driving around, I guess, you see maps with names in the end in Aki or, different things that denotes where people live. So it's sort of like a town or a city, but it's a place where people live. So it denotes that. So people live there. So with the people who live in the land of the dawn or dawn land or people of the first light, in English, we can kind of say it in several different ways. So Wabanaki describes us as the easternmost people on this continent. And we do extend into the Atlantic Canada regions. So as a people, we do see the sun first on this continent. And that describes us. So we knew that, we described ourselves as that when we were talking about who we are. And so we have 4 tribes that are in this Confederation, understanding that the Confederation was originally put together to protect ourselves against the Mohawk invasions. And we're talking about 3,000, 2,800 years ago when we had these epic battles with the Mohawk tribes. And they're part of another confederation called the Iroquois Confederation. We had no battles with anybody else within the Iroquois Confederation, but the Mohawk entered into our territory. So we had to form this confederation to protect our people. And that's what we did. So the Confederation is ancient. It's very much older, hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years older than the pyramids. So we go back and in an oral tradition society, we write these sort of stories within a belt called the Wampum belt, which I think I introduced in this presentation later on. But modern day tribes that live in Maine are the Passamaquoddy and then the Micmac, the Penobscot and the Maliseet. Passamaquoddy, basically it means place where the pollock is plenty. So if you're going to fish, you want some pollock, that's where you go. And the village that was set up there actually was set up there because of the abundance of the ocean. Micmac or Mi'kmaq means people of the woods or forest. Some people like to say woods. We're in Maine, we say woods. Sometimes we say forest. But they lived more inland in the description of their name, Mi'kmaq. Penobscot, or how we say Brunawupskig, somehow got translated into Penobscot by the Portuguese or Spanish, who were the original 2 explorers to this area, followed by the French and then the English. Means the people who live where the rocks stick out of the water. So our village on Indian Island, where I grew up, which is off from Old Town, is surrounded at the upper end of the island by whitewater rapids. And Maliseet, or Wolastoqey, means simply people of the beautiful river. So our names are not necessarily just flat, plain names. They're very descriptive of geography. And when we introduced ourselves to explorers, earlier explorers that were documenting it, that's how we know, because we see their documentation of that interaction. When they came here, this is how they presented themselves. Who are you? And we always introduced ourselves because that question was kind of strange, being among people for thousands of years who were of you, to have somebody ask, who are you? And so we would just describe who we were by where we lived. And that sort of became our tribal name. So that's kind of historic, but again, it's connecting us to the land because it's descriptive of the land. So the Wabanaki Confederation is, like I said, it's about 2,800 to 3,000 years as far as we can go back and see based on our records, is represented by 2 different symbols. And so as a confederation, this particular logo that you're looking at now, we call the double curve. And you see on the left-hand side, something that looks like a 3 and an E back to back. If you remove them from this logo, this design, it basically will tell you that this is a symbol for unity. This is what we call the Mawiomi, the Together Council. And when you add that 3 and E, that's symbolic of a door that's closed. If you turn those around where they face each other, it looks like a number 8, which means there's a door that's open. When that door is open, that means we let in protection of other people, or we let out people who are in our Confederation that we're protecting that want to leave because maybe they're too far away for our protection or whatever it may be. And the last time that door was open, and they remain open for about 50 years, was when the Wabanaki tribes, who basically they went west of us. So parts of the Wabanaki people went west. And then in modern times, they started to be called the Wabanaki by, again, the explorers. How did that word come to be? Well, the W in our language is silent. So when I say Wabanaki, actually, it should be pronounced as a silent U. So it'd be Wabanaki, 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 Wabanaki. And folks coming from Europe start their words off with sharp sounds. And we don't. We start our words off with softer sounds that are almost non-existent when we speak. So what they were hearing when we were saying Wabanaki, 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 they were hearing Wabanaki. And so they documented it as Wabanaki, but that's not really a word. They became that. They moved further and further west into the Canadian region of Quebec, and moved in with the other Algonquin tribes of which we're related to. And then they asked for us to be released from their protection because they were so far west of us, we couldn't physically do it. So that's the last time that door was open. But let's talk about this logo. It's ancient, and it's a geographic sort of descriptor. So when you enter Wabanaki territory, this would be either carved in rocks on the borderlines of Wabanaki territories or carved into trees. So that when you enter into Wabanaki territory, which is originally it's Maine, it consists of Maine, parts of Quebec, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Maine, if I didn't say Maine yet. So it's a huge region of tribes and villages, 4 tribes, dozens of tribal villages. And the double curves of the things that look curly on the ends, on the left and the right, on the top and the bottom, are denoting that we're people of the water, oceans, rivers, and lakes. And so there's one that represents each one of the 4 tribes, and it's a balance. And then you have this bar looking thing that goes down the middle, which actually looks like an I-beam. I think we invented it. It's right there. And it holds us all together. It's what binds us together. It's the philosophy of government and spirituality and personhood that we're all grown from. And then you have the 2 X's in the middle on each side of that bar. Each one of those lines, one of the X's, I mean, there's 2 lines in the X's. So you see the white part represents each of the 4 tribes. And then together we hold it up. Excuse me. And that's an ancient symbol we use today to describe the Wabanaki Confederation. So all the tribes in Maine, like I said at the beginning, form a single linguistic group of the Algonquin. So we're related broadly to a number of other tribes that are not from Maine. There are approximately 28 different language groups in North America, which means that there are 28 distinct, separate, totally different groups of indigenous people in North America. Although when you think of Native Americans, we always are kind of combined together. We're supposed to look the same, talk the same, eat the same. We don't. There's 28 language groups, which means there's 28 different groups of ethnicities of people in North America, ancient wise. So, you know, the example is if we look at Africa, the continent of Africa, and we look at the very bottom country, South Africa, and we look at the two like most northern countries in Africa, like Morocco or Egypt, we don't ever, or we're never taught that the people of Africa, although they've been on that continent for thousands of years as well, are the same people. We always know they're different people. But yet, the continent of North America, we're all looked at as one people. And that's not true. So to bring it back home here in Maine, we formed a single linguistic group of the Algonquin. So the tribes that speak the Algonquin dialect, we're all related to. And let's see. Let's look at this map. This is a US map. It doesn't include it doesn't include Canada. But we can see, I'll move my cursor on this, like almost this peach fleshy area here and over here. That's the Algonquin. And if you took it up into Canada, way up here, follow it up and take it over to the Maritimes and down, that's the Confederation of tribes of the Algonquin, which we're a part of. So we speak the same language as all these tribes. The other colors you see are other differentiations of different distinct people. So we don't speak their language, we don't look like them, we don't eat their food or any of that stuff. But we did have extensive trade routes with them. We all had trade among each other. So even though we were different people, we understood enough of each other's language regionally to do trading with them. For example, Kineo Stone, Moosehead Lake in Greenville, Maine, has a mountain called Mount Kineo on it. And there's a certain kind of stone that comes off that's called Kineo Stone. That Kineo Stone, the only known place in North America that it comes from is Mount Kineo in Moosehead Lake. And that stone has been found all the way out into California and dated back 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, as far as it being in that particular soil. So we know that for thousands of years, we've had extensive trade with many different tribes on this continent. And maybe we traded raw materials to somebody and they traded bits of it to other people, and finally it gets out to California. But the trade is extensive. The Wabanakis traded with Southern New England tribes as well, who the Southern New England tribes were more, they tended to farm more. We're more of a hunter-gatherer society. So we tended to hunt and gather, and we would have an excessive amount. We always had to have 10 days supply of food ahead of us. So during the winter, as a hunter-gatherer society, you always wanted to have in your food cache 10 days of food, 3 meals a day for as many people as you had in your particular village. So we would kind of always have to be hunting and gathering, always. So sometimes we'd trade some of our furs or meat or fish for plant-based stuff that was grown, say, on Martha's Vineyard, corn or squash or things like that. So we did engage in that. Just for your purview, so the Algonquin family here that we are related to, all these tribes that are listed under the Algonquin tribe family here are the same language speakers as we are in Maine. So we're part of an extensive group. I'll read through it, but you can read along with me. So there's the Wabanaki, the Algonquin, Penobscot, Pentacook, Passamaquoddy, Micmac, Maliseet, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Pequot, Mohegan, Narragansett, Montauk, Mohegan, Chippewa or Ojibwe, or what we call Anishinaabe, Cree, Kickapoo, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Menominee, Miami, Sac and Fox, Shawnee, the Delaware or the Lenape, Illinois, Nanacook, Powhatan, Wappinger, Peoria, or Sikatan. So all these tribes speak the same language as us, the tribes of Maine. And then of course in the East, We have the Iroquois family as well listed there. And there's one Siouan family, like the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Nez Perce, the Utes, they're all Siouan language groups. The only one in the east is the Winnebago. They're the furthest east Siouan group. I'm not sure. I don't know how they got over here. Maybe they had big travel vehicles that they came in. I don't know. But the Winnebagos ended up over here somewhat. But they're originally from out in the Midwest. And again, I'm going to share this. So if you want to request it, you can. This PowerPoint. So the tribal logos, every tribe has a logo on their tribal flags. And these are the various ones that exist today. I think the one with the eagle on the left, on the right, is now updated, but I'm not sure what the new one is yet. But there are 2 Passamaquoddy villages in the state of Maine. So there are actually 5 tribal villages in the state of Maine, but 4 tribes. And that's because the Passamaquoddy exist in 2 different areas. So that's really important to understand. You know, before we had the borders that exist now, if you can picture here in this map, the Confederation, this was a map that was drawn, I think, back in the 16 or 1700s, maybe, yeah. But you can see this line to the left where the borderlands of the Wabanaki Confederation was, which actually includes part of northern Massachusetts. You can see the line coming down there, all of New Hampshire and most of Vermont, as well as going up to the Gaspé Peninsula on Quebec, and includes many of the Maritimes, well, all the Canadian Maritimes actually. Just look at that and you can see where we were, different tribes. So there was a lot of tribes that existed. Almost every river that we look at was a tribe. So we got the Penobscot, we had the Piscataquis, we got the Androscoggins, you know, all these were tribes at one time. But because of land sorts of issues, you know, once Europeans came over, we were forced into certain areas. So these tribes, as far as where their location, because these names describe the location, but the people were the same people as us, moved in with other tribes that existed that were more protected or away from people. So some of them, like the Pigwackets or the Pennacook, folks would move north and go maybe into the Algonquin tribes up there, or they would come, you know, northeast and come into the Penobscot tribe or the Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, or Micmacs. Wherever they wanted to be, they would go. They were the same people. So we didn't necessarily lose tribes necessarily. We just lost locations, if that makes sense. So these tribes didn't fail to exist. They were not annihilated. They just, folks from those areas just moved in with their families that lived in other areas. So at the time this map was drawn, the villages numbered no more than 500 people. Because if you're a hunter-gatherer society, you don't want to have more than 500 people to have to hunt and gather for. Everybody had different roles. And so everybody's role contributed to the welfare of the society. And so that was really important. So, you know, these tribes, they were smaller villages really at the time. So it wasn't like hundreds or thousands of people moved in. In fact, today, the Penobscot tribe is probably about 2,000 people. The Passamaquoddy tribe is about 2,200 people. The Maliseet tribe is, I think, 800, and the Micmac tribe, I think, have 600. So the tribes are small in number, but still going pretty strong. Today, if you looked at that map we just saw where we used to live, today these dots represent our headquarters of our tribal villages. It does not represent the amount of land we own, because between the Passamaquoddies and the Penobscots, we own probably 500,000 acres of land together. The Maliseets, I think, maybe have a couple hundred acres, maybe 300 acres, and the Micmacs have about the same amount of acreage. but that's not, the acreage I'm just mentioning is not including the tribal headquarters, which these dots represent in Maine. So you can see the Maliseet are up in near Holton, Maine, and then the Micmac are up in, they're literally in Presque Isle, in downtown Presque Isle. And the Passamaquoddy, the two blue dots on the right-hand side of the map, show where they live. The lower one is Sibayak, or there's plenty of pollock. The other one is Madocmiguk, which means it's on the big lake, which is near Princeton, Maine. And the Penobscot are in this darker dot right in the middle of the Penobscot River in Penobscot County. So you can see that as well. So the tribes that were west of us either moved in with us or moved further west with the other Algonquin tribes. So let's see. So today we have Wabanaki plates. You might have seen these license plates. And you can see on the upper left-hand side a sort of rendition of the Wabanaki Confederation logo on these Wabanaki plates. The only people that can acquire these plates are when you go to the DMV, you have to produce a tribal document that's literally a piece of paper that is on tribal letterhead that states your citizenship in that tribe. And when you show this there, you can get these plates. They're not extra, they're not vanity plates. I mean, you can get them with whatever you want on them, or you can just take them straight up how they're issued. But they're not any extra cost to tribal citizens, but they're only available to tribal citizens in the state of Maine. And we've had them for quite a while, I think maybe 10 years, maybe a little longer. But you can see Mount Katahdin at the bottom, and then there's almost a watermark of an eagle feather in the middle. But this was quite an accomplishment to get this, because no state has issued license plates publicly like this to Confederation tribal citizens. There are tribes that issue tribal plates, but they're not state plates. So they don't necessarily say the state on them. So I could go to Saginaw, Chippewa, and on the reservation out in Saginaw, they issue their own plates. And you have to get a special sticker for them for them to be driving in the state to be recognized. But Maine has actually issued a plate which is unique. So this is an example of the plate. This was the first one that was made. I think it was Governor John Baldacci, so it might have been even longer, that got the first plate. That was quite a while ago. Then I just want to talk quickly. I think we got, let me just look at, my clock is terrible. I've got about maybe 7 or 8 more minutes. I'll talk about Wabanaki Wampum traditional law, because we have law, we have peacekeepers, we call them in English. And they basically, we have penalties for breaking laws, hurting women, hurting children, stealing, any violation of any law that we have. Obviously, as an ancient society, you don't exist, or any society, you don't exist without rule of law and consequence for breaking rule of law. So we have these wampum belts, and you can see it at the bottom here. And that basically is our Wabanaki wampum belt. So that's indicative of all our tribes too. I'll just quickly, I hope you can see the scroll. So you have 4 directions here. There's 4 directions, and this is indicative of a house. This little kind of pyramid looking thing. Another 4 direction, another house. And right here is a pipe that our leaders would carry. Another house, another 4 direction, another house, another 4 directions. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 directions, 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, which is indicative of the 4 tribes in the Confederation, held together by this leadership symbol, the rule of law. So there's literally wampum law and consequences that they describe penalties from banishment to extra work to to different kinds of things that happen for folks who do break laws. You are held accountable, and they're all written in these wampum belts. And wampum, the word wampum literally means it is talking. So somebody has to know how to read these belts. Not everybody is trained how to do this. They're made out of a quahog shell, the purple parts and the white parts of a quahog shell, which is a giant clam shell. And they're put together again in story form, almost like how the Greeks and the Romans kind of use different symbolisms to describe things rather than a letter system to write things. And then you would learn how to read these. So we had traditional wampum law. So the 4 white triangles are wigwams or houses, and each house, each wigwam, the word wigwam means house. And so the center is a pipe symbol for political peace, which allies had joined, and rule of law. And the seat and the belt serves as a reminder of the Confederacy and was carried from village to village to deliver message, whatever it might be. So there was hundreds of different belts. Each one contained a different message. And some of them had your family story, some of them were law, but it all comes out of rule of law and consequence. So that's just another picture, another slide. And the bottom one is another Confederation symbol. You can see the symbol in the middle, which is we're all bound in unity. It's a geometric design because the way it's written, the way the beads go, you can't do a complete circle. And then the 4 tribes. So it's another version, but the top one is our official version. The lower one was one that was carried by chiefs just to denote where they were from. So if somebody looked at it, they would see, oh, they're from the Confederation. They look at the top one, you actually are looking at something that is held by those who carry out rule of law and consequence. And so when we talk about wampum, there's, the shape does matter. There's the round disc that looks like a button, and there's the tube ones. The tube ones are ceremonial, highly ceremonial, only used for certain things. Not everybody could have them, but the pieces that would look like discs, they could be used to decorate clothes. So you can see how they're broken up here, how they're taken from the shells and actually made into beads. So I think what I want to do is, because of time, I'm just going to go through these, but these, like I said, these PowerPoints are available to you. There was only certain people that carried the belts, so you can look at them. They were used also in diplomacy. I think we're going to just cut out maybe, well, let's just talk about this last one. Let's recap. So as far as wampum goes, I can't emphasize this enough that it's a very spiritual and diplomatic object, and it tells the stories. Later on, or in like more modern times, they were created for their beauty. And there's a misnomer that wampum is money. It's not money. It's never been money for tribes. It's been money. The Dutch used to use it as money. They called it seawant. And 1 fathom of seawant was worth a certain amount of trade. So a fathom is 6 feet. So a 6-foot strand of the disc beads that were branded with the Dutch logos were actually literally money, but the tribes never used them as money, and only handled by certain people who have the authority to handle them. Not everybody can. I do see there are some questions. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to go to this. So we're all looking together here. And I see that so you shouldn't be seeing any screen share now. But as far as to end, before we get to any questions, and if we don't have questions, I'm still going to keep talking because I can. And I mean, I can because I have so much information I could share in my head. But I would really like you guys to have some questions. There seems to be 100 people on. And hopefully, if we get 5 or 6 questions, that would take up the rest of the time. But one of the things I want you to understand, I think that's really important, is that we are people of today as well. We're not just of the past. Obviously, you know that, you're here. But, we engage in everything possible educationally that we can, so that we can be represented in different facets of society. And that we still maintain a strong connection to our cultural roots and the land as well. We have sort of a lot of conflict with the state of Maine in lawsuits and land rights and interpretations of those land rights based on the 1980 Maine Indian Land Claim Settlements Act, which was it was just considered the worst act in modern Indian history in the country. And just for a side note here, I when I was younger, I was paired up to mentor with a woman who was in my same field, and her name was Wilma Mankiller. And she was a highly prominent Cherokee chief from Oklahoma. And I knew about her. I knew about her through a lot of different ways. She just was very prominent. And I introduced myself to her when we first sat down, and she said, you know, what tribe are you? And I said, I'm Penobscot. She goes, oh yeah, you guys have the Maine Indian Land Claim Settlement. I said, yeah, we did. She goes, that's the one we used, the Cherokee tribe used as what not to do. And so I thought, oh great, this is good. So the tribes are currently in the Supreme Court. Maine's the only state out of all 50 states that has grants 23 less rights that are approved by the federal government to the tribes. So there's a bill before the state and now, and it's going through. So we are engaged, and I want to say this because I want you to know that we are engaged in still in some diplomatic tensions with the state. We're nations within this nation, and so being recognized as that federally recognized tribes, because the tribes of Maine are federally recognized. In other words, there are either state recognized tribes, which only the states recognize the tribes for purposes like casino gambling or heritage bills. The tribes of Maine are federally recognized tribes, so we answer to the federal government with limitations, again, because we're in Maine. And Maine only allows us to communicate so much to the federal government. So it's a little bit, you know, we're still going through some things. We think we're going to come out on the end that will be equal to all other 49 states as far as their tribes' rights go. So we're hoping that that comes through at some point. And also Maine is the only state out of all 50 states that does not have any Native American mascots in any public schools from K through college. And that was made on the local level in every single town, which is really an awesome thing for them to all do that. And then after the fact, after there was no Native mascots in the state of Maine, the state of Maine did pass a bill to make sure that schools don't revert back to that by passing a bill a few years ago, making it, I don't know if it's a word illegal, but it's to make it so that they can't go back to using indigenous names in their schools. Like you can use warriors, but not a warrior's head of an Indian, because warriors are all over the world. And Indians, that's gone. Redskins was one in southern Maine, but all these different sorts of school names are now non-existent. So that's the end of my official presentation. And I'm kind of glancing over at the comments here. And if you have any, I'm looking down, there's mostly comments. Somebody says, can you talk a little about the use of sweat lodges and their purpose? I have a friend of mine, Clint, who is the liaison from the Iroquois tribe in New York, and he works in the New York prison systems. So he travels as a representative. So he's Onondaga, and he's a sub chief in the Longhouse, the Iroquois Longhouse. And since I've known him since we were teenagers, so going on like 15 years. No, I'm just kidding. I'm a little older than that. But I've known him for quite a while. And one of the jobs he took over was he goes into the prison systems in New York State and brings ceremonies, you know, to the indigenous prisoners there. And even prisoners, because our spirituality is not just for us. If non-native prisoners in the system are interested in native spirituality because they feel like they can't relate to religion or whatever, he also meets with them as well. But they do this stuff. And one of the things that they do is sweat lodge ceremonies, which is a small like house that you literally crawl into. You heat your rocks outside and on a fire, and you bring them inside, and then there's water splashed on those rocks, and it gets really hot, and you sweat. And there's ceremonies that are done in those lodge ceremonies. They're cleansing. You sweat everything out into the ground, and you release those things, and to never take them back again. And it's a long process of purification, because it physically purifies the body, but in order to mentally purify the mind, you really have to understand that that takes place in a different way. So a sweat lodge is a physical purification, and you practice the spiritual part of it, one-on-one. So Clint, he does that. I don't know if we have anybody in Maine that does that, but he does it in the New York prison systems, and it's really interesting to hear his stories and how successful things are for him, and how people turn their lives around because they can connect to it. So it's really good. I hope that kind of answered the question a little bit. Let's see. How are Passamaquoddy making sure the culture survives through generations of transition? Well, you keep your language as best as you can in order to maintain your culture. And within that language, you can also practice ceremonies, but it's not exclusive. So in other words, you can practice ceremonies without having the language. We're a modern people, and so we have every need every modern person has, but the communities do involve their citizens in activities if you choose to be part of them. We have drumming, we have storytelling, we have basket making workshops, we have all different kinds of things that happen within the tribe all year round that help keep us connected to who we are, and maintain that sense of culture. Every human that existed in the history of this planet changes over time. Languages change, cultures and values change, and we do our best to kind of keep the core of that. So as long as we keep the core of it, we can make other things happen. For instance, women used to never drum on a skin drum. Now they're welcome to drum on a skin drum, and that's just because cultures and traditions change over time. And they drummed on bark, actually, birch bark. But when they express they want to do something, then they can do something. So things can change. Cultures and values do change. Do I teach my native language? I did at one time. I find that I have a very I'm not good at it. I just want you to say it. Let's say it. Come on, say it. Now, how come you can't remember it next week? But I teach in other ways. Like I teach. I've been teaching at the university level for 22 years, but I taught in middle school social studies and K through 8 native studies. And I can teach a language. It's just not my thing. But we do teach it at the University of Maine. Actually, you can take 2 classes, Wabanaki language 1 and 2, and get the gist of it. And it's good to have, because sometimes our elders who speak the language end up in a hospital and have memory issues, and forget that nurses and doctors, support staff can't speak the language, and they get frustrated because they don't understand why no one can understand them. So we send them in as interpreters as well. You can learn enough to be able to get by. So yeah, language is taught in all the tribal schools in the state as well. Thank you, Debbie. I do a lot of talking with the Maine Department of Ed, but not with the wellness conference or anything like that. But that would be something always interests me. I created a micro credential for the system office where somebody could take 5 or 6 hours, as through a week or 2 or a month for $25, and get certified in a micro credential in Wabanaki in Maine. What we just talked about, we get into more detail in it, but it's a self-driven micro credential that will be available in a couple more months. It's all done. And I'm hoping that other ethnic groups use it to create micro credentials as well. And you get a little badge, says Dawnland, Maine Indian History. that you can put on your LinkedIn or on your resume. But it's kind of a good thing. So that's available too. Yeah, so the Maine tribes were involved in the Revolutionary War. Actually, there's quite a few correspondence letters. Actually, working on a book on this, 8 chapters with Wabanakis in the Revolutionary War. We're direct correspondence with George Washington, and he sent Colonel John Allen to us, and also Paul Revere, who was the liaison at the earlier stages, and got our chief Joseph Orno to get the other tribes involved in the Revolutionary War. And so a little side fact here is that in Machias, behind Helen's Restaurant, there is, that's where the first shot for the Revolutionary War was shot with a musket gun. And it was one of the chiefs of the Passamaquoddy, who was my 5 great grandfathers, who just asked John Allen, can I shoot that British soldier off the bow of that ship? And he said, there's no way you can do that. It ended up being like 300 yards away with a musket. There's no way you can do it. And he said, well, they were shooting at everybody on the shore. So they thought, well, let's just shoot back at him just once. And so he shot the gun, the chief, the Passamaquoddy chief, and the captain of that particular ship just fell into the ocean. And that was the first shot of the Revolutionary War. So the Penobscots and Passamaquoddies and Micmacs did capture 23 British warships and turned them over to the colonies in Boston so they could use them against the British. There was one rogue Micmac guy who captured one who kept it. He liked it. And he sailed it up and down the shore of Maine into Massachusetts and became a pirate. And he was pirating ships, this Micmac guy. So there's some interesting history there that's well documented during the Revolutionary War. But the night that George Washington was on the Delaware River before he crossed, he wrote a letter to each one of the Maine tribes. And we have those letters still. And so he was just basically explaining that he was happy we were going to be involved in the war, and made us a lot of promises for hunting and fishing territories that, you know, if the colonies did win against the British, we would be returned to us, which were beyond his control, and they were not returned to us in the end. So yeah, I could talk forever about the Revolutionary War. I got tons of stuff. I'm working on that book, actually. Yeah, so I think I kind of scrolled down through the questions. We got about 8 more minutes. Does anybody have any other questions that you want to either type in, or I'm just kind of seeing if I did, or type in, or I don't know if you have access to speak, but if you do have some, you can type them in.
John, I have a question.
Yes.
We hear a lot of different things about Native American, Indigenous, Indian. What's the preferred way of connecting or saying some about your folks?
That's a really good question. That's a national level sort of discussion. So American Indian, Native American are what tribes tend to go by when you talk about our tribal governments using those words. The words Indian to represent ourselves, we do use quite a bit. And we know it's not necessarily representative of us because it's really for Indians. But the thing is about that was that at that time when Columbus called the first people he met Indians, he was actually thinking it was the Indian Trading Company because the country was called Hindu Land. So it wasn't India as it is now. So so it really is it's even a misnomer in that respect. But the word Indian, we have to hold on to that because there's actually a subsection of constitutional law in the United States called American Indian law. You can get degrees in it, you can practice it specifically, and it's constitutionally recognized by the Supreme Court. And so if we were to discard the word Indian as stripping that from our identity, we technically, and this could be argued in courts, and this is why tribes haven't done this, is that we technically give up our rights to that law, that whole subsection of law. which is constitutionally established. So we keep that word Indian. We don't approach each other and say, hey, are you Indian? Are you Indian? Instead, we'll say, what, you tribal, which tribe, or things like that. But I think, there are people that really get into this, the microcosms of it, but I think we need to recognize, and I think a lot of tribes do recognize, I'm executive vice chair of the American Indian Institute out of Bozeman, Montana. And over the course of the years, I've been involved in that now. I'm 54 years old. I've been involved since I was 20. And I've been to dozens upon dozens of reservations in the United States and Canada. And we all use those words interchangeably. Native American, American Indian, up in Canada, they use Amerindian or Indigenous. So it depends on who we're talking to and what the subject is. We use them all. And I purposely, when I teach my courses, I say them all throughout the semester, so people can get comfortable in how they're used. But when we identify ourselves to each other as Indigenous people, we just ask, what's your nation? What's your clan? Or who's your family? So we don't say, hey, you American Indian, you Native American, but I will say, Native American or American Indian or whatever. But they all have some bearing in something that's really important. But technically, we're not any of them technically, but we do have to recognize that in modern times, we have to accept how we're identified and utilize that to our advantage. And I think a lot of times people are. When the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed in 1979, which is a federal law, because it was illegal for us in this country for almost 100 years. I think it was 82 years or 87 years, whatever it was. It was literally illegal. It was passed through the House and Senate in the late 1800s that we were not to speak our language or practice our ceremonies, but that was repealed and replaced in 1979. Maine was also the next to last state to make us citizens in 1964. Established voting places for us to be able to vote in federal elections. So within the state of Maine, we were not citizens until 1964. We had no rights to vote. Connecticut was the first state to do that in 1921. And so a lot of Penobscots moved to Connecticut. And in fact, we got about 300 Penobscots living in Hartford, Connecticut that have been down there for about 100 years. So it's really interesting when you look at stuff like that. All right.
John, can we ask one more question? Because then I think we have to go.
Sure.
It's from Robin. It says, I've been in many meetings that start with introductions where we give our pronouns and then state the indigenous land that we are living on. Then the meeting continues. This feels superficial and almost offensive, though I know the intent is the opposite. Any thoughts on how to appropriately acknowledge our place in the state without it feeling like just another part of our introduction?
Well, I also think we have to learn how to hear things. So these land acknowledgement statements, I believe that's what you're referring to, are critical. They're important. It's how we hear them and how we process it is individual. So some people, I do hear that once in a while, find like, what's the purpose? It just seems, it does seem superficial. It seems like it's said without emotion. It's read. It's just there. It plops down on you. And, I get it. I've heard land acknowledgement statements all over the place. But again, as a person sitting, it's how we process it. How do we handle it? What's our personalities? How are our personalities developed in that we can sort of hear it with meaningful purpose, I guess. So, I do this exercise in my class, and I think over time, like you hear it, you process it, and it can sound superficial, but then we get all the education throughout time, and we end up at the end of the semester, and we ask the same question, and people have a little more insight and a little more depth to it. But I think I think they're important. I don't think they're meant to be critical. I don't think they're meant to be blaming, but I think mostly they're meant to just be, this is a traditional land in which, tribes look at the people here, not you, your ancestors maybe, as invaders and occupiers, which is technically what we as a country today would call people that do the same thing in other countries. But we also have to understand that, we sit in certain places of privilege because of what happened. Even though we didn't personally do it or were responsible, we benefit from what was done. And so we have to acknowledge that. And I think that's all part of the processing of these land acknowledgement statements. And maybe they just need to be beefed up a little bit more. They need to be a little more meaningful in how they're portrayed and put out. So I know what time is up. I will email this PowerPoint later on to Roy. If you want to request it from him, I believe you can do that. But if you have any follow-up questions for me or anything you'd like to talk about, I'm available at the University of Maine in Orono. Just you can Google me, and on the website of the University of Maine, you'll find me. So I'm always happy to kind of follow up. Thank you.
John, we really appreciate you coming along and doing this. Greatly appreciate it. Excellent job. Some incredible information you gave us, and I hope we can expand on that. So thank you. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you all. I appreciate you all. Thank you.